So just getting started, you know me, Phahsa, I've already introduced myself, but I think that it's important that we get to know who these great panelists are. When I call on your name, if you could just unmute your mic and just give us 30 seconds about who you are and you know, some of the work that you do, and we'll go from there. Andrew Hacker.
Hey there, PJ.
What's
Hi,
going on, man?
everybody. So my name is Andrew Hacker. Yes, my last name is Hacker. I'm the CEO of ThoughtAI and also the cybersecurity expert in residence at Harrisburg University in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Our company ThoughtAI is building the next generation of artificial intelligence by merging algorithms and data. So basically all information on the internet has its own intelligence. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Orne Bay.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Orne Bay. I'm the founder and CEO of Excellerent Technology Solutions. We're an IT services company headquartered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're a global organization that leverages the might of Ethiopia to deliver software applications and products to our customers globally. And we are extremely proud and happy to be partnering with the V to help build, Presence Browser.
Okay. No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Orne. Our other panelist is Michaela.
No. It's Nicole Chi. Is she here?
I don't believe she's on.
Oh wow. Okay. And
doesn't look like she's here. Yeah.
So why don't you dialogue with these folks while we try to? Maybe there's a link problem. So
not a problem. So yeah. So Andrew, you working in artificial intelligence, I'm sure you understand the role that AI is playing in today's society. When you say smart technology and smart AI, smart data, I'm wondering, in terms of the internet, in terms of the web, how do you see the state of the web being impacted by your work, or how's the web we're currently working with, impacting your work?
Sure. That's a great question. Yeah, so a lot of the things that we are seeing today have to do with convergence. Over the past decade, the past 20 years since the internet started, the internet's been through a lot of various phases. You guys all remember the original HTML web page, literally text, but now the web has, so many amazing technologies, whether it's virtual reality, video, so many layers of different types of technologies. There's also a massive integration of web technologies, whether it's browser or servers or, even web APIs that can connect to so many different things, both digital, but also physical, right? So there's this big convergence with the physical world. And now that we've got, so many devices, so many sensors, right? Your phone's got over 20 or 30 different things that it senses, whether it's, your location, accelerometer, things that you do, even connecting to your car, right? So all of these things, as you combine all of these different information sources, right, into one thing, right now the web, is kind of like, if you want to say it's in its second phase. And then, if we think about maybe its third big, evolutionary change, we kind of see the convergence of all these different types of information. Because right now you've got a lot of different corporate entities, companies, they've all got their own ways of doing things, their own processes, their own data formats, right? And they don't necessarily, translate well from, even from one industry to another. So, say you've got a specific data format in healthcare, versus, transportation, for example. The other thing to keep in mind is, even with artificial intelligence, I hate to say AI is in its infancy, because, AI has been, sort of conceived probably in the 50s and, 1980s. It kind of had a little resurgence there. And then, it's not till, this past decade that we're really seeing some really incredible things happen with AI. But even so, AI is kind of still in that first round of, figuring out the best algorithms, figuring out the best methods. How do we work with all this data? The way we see things is, that the next big jump, the big leap is going to be, all these technologies kind of coming together. You've got hardware platforms, you've got, companies making artificial intelligence chipsets, right? So they can actually process models right in the chips. themselves. So there's a convergence of computing technology with information. And
Okay.
all this to say is that there's going to be a lot more free flow of information, a lot more exchange of information in a way that really impacts, help sustainability and is very goal oriented. So that's kind of how we see it.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. Nicole Chi, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Nicole, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and while you're at it, just the state of the web. Could you tell us how the state of the web is potentially impacting your work currently, and how you could see a future web being, being something that you use as a tool to further your cause?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Nicole. I'm a civic technologist. And I guess a little bit about me. So I've been working in civic tech for the past couple of years, first in digital capacity building for the social impact sector. So thinking about and working with nonprofits to assess their digital capacity challenges, and thinking about how technology can help these social impact organizations do their work better, as well as the ways in which they're being left behind. After that, I went to work in policy and research for a while at a think tank in DC, focused on future work and AI ethics, and then transitioned back into the civic tech sector, more on the product side, with my most recent product, platformabuse.org. So platformabuse.org is a centralized knowledge source of technological harms and mitigations to guide safer product development. And so our whole ethos is that a lot of forms of platform abuse are actually preventable. So the harms created by technology are not an inevitable thing, but it's just that the builders of technology, so our designers, our engineers, our product managers, don't know enough about the ways in which their tools, like any tools, right, can be used by bad actors, or maybe even used unintentionally to harm others.
Mm-hmm.
I think going back to the question that you posed, the state of social media, I think just as in the US we're going through and have been for some time, a crisis of trust in state institutions, we're also currently going through a crisis of trust in digital institutions. And what isn't working right now is our reliance solely on these large players, Facebook, Twitter, etc., to be the arbiters of what's right and what's healthy for the social fabric of our society. Fundamentally, right, our crisis of trust in digital institutions is tied to our crisis of trust in Facebook, right? Like the fact that we don't trust what's currently out there. One great quote from someone in this space, Ethan Zuckerman, is that our responses to the challenges of the contemporary media ecosystem are marked by failures of imagination. And I think we're really at this point where we're starting to see more than ever how the lack of substantive competition in social media is affecting our quality of life online, which is why I'm so excited to be here. I think the Overweb and other initiatives that are new, that have new leaders with new ideas, and that also really aren't just building on top of what currently is there, but trying to reimagine a more radical internet future. I think these exercises are really important.
Wow. Yeah. And this is how the web was originally meant to have, and a lot of the opportunity that you're talking about, and it was just kind of stripped from it and removed from it. So definitely look forward to getting more of your thoughts on that. Albert Kim, thank you for joining us. Are you speaking on this panel? First off, let me ask that question. Hello, Albert?
No, Albert is not on this.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if he's supposed to be on here or not. Have we covered all of the panelists? Is it Andrew, Orne, and Nicole?
Yeah, Fred was supposed to be on here. I'm not seeing him. And also,
okay.
We're also supposed to be having Nadia. And I'm trying to.
Is that Nadia? It doesn't have her name under her thing. Nadia, could you please speak, introduce yourself, and answer that exact question as well? tell us about the tell us about what your thoughts are around how the current web is impacting your work, and where you see the web going, and how that the new web can be used as a vehicle to further your cause.
Hi. So I should say a little bit about where I'm coming from, maybe, and that will give a little context to my answers to your questions. So my background started out in advertising, and then I sort of skidded into policy by mistake, and realized there was such a thing as policy. I'm an engineer by training, and I ended up at the Council of Europe, and this was happening at around the time of in 2011, you know, as the Arab Spring was breaking. It was like the world exploded open. So you had the Arab Spring happening, you had Occupy, you had anti-ACTA protests, you had everything seemed to be happening at the same time. And at the same time, we were seeing a massive unemployment, youth unemployment all over the place. In places like Spain, it was like almost 50%. And in Sweden, where I'm from, it was in the 20%. And that was in spite of an economy that was in general quite healthy. So I came into this work asking, you know, okay, well, how, so these things are happening in all of these different places, and the root causes are connected, and we have this medium, and we're in touch with all of these people. How could we leverage this to make sense of what's going on and understand where it might make sense to coordinate efforts or make better use of our time as individuals or small NGOs or whatever with little resources? And what came out of this was a realization that actually what was wrong with the internet is really like what's wrong with people in general. It's conversation and dialogue, right? So a lot of information does not dialogue make, right? Dialogue is people coming into a room with pieces of a map, and then you find each other, and then you get the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is so much larger and more than, you know, the components. And I would say it's the same with conversation. Conversation is a limitation when you're moving online because of the sheer numbers of people. Like, it's very hard to have a meaningful conversation with 100 people, in the sense that you can maintain somewhat of a coherent outlook and can remember, keep in mind what was already somehow agreed on or understood, and then build on that. It's like this perpetual attention deficiency disorder. So if we talk about, you know, what's wrong with the web today, I don't think it's something very specific. Like the challenges I'm interested in are not specific to this infrastructure or that infrastructure. It's the use of, you know, human to human mediated communication to solve bigger issues. And that's conversational technology, that's human and social technology.
Wow. It's definitely difficult to achieve that without, it's going to be very difficult to achieve that if we continue to look at people as consumers solely. And that's, I really appreciate your points. I think everybody's made some really, really, really strong points. I think we have a couple of people that might have joined us. If you can, just unmute your mic and introduce yourself and get and answer the question. What exactly does it mean to have, what is the current state of the web right now? And how does the state of the web right now impact your work and the work that you're doing? Before we move on to the next question.
Yeah,
Who are you
I want
asking?
to add. I think I've only introduced myself. I didn't get an
Oh, okay,
opportunity
Orne,
to actually,
please.
address that. So coming, from an IT services background, I've been in the IT services industry for the last 30 years. So we have kind of like a front row seat to the development of this whole platform, because my business has more or less been taking customers' business challenges and solving those challenges through technology. And as the internet became more prominent, so what it meant to me was a huge e-commerce boom, right? So the internet is built on the idea that you have access to consumers, right? So that's what it meant to the IT services industry. Suddenly you're building, what is a shopping cart, right? How do you add a shopping cart to your website, right? That's what it initially is. And it evolved from there, again, with kind of like, social media. But at the heart of it, it is, as you mentioned, it's viewed as more access to more consumers, right? A way to get information out in front of people, quicker, right? It's easy advertisement if you can hit the right hit the right audience to your website. I mean, the web is essentially Amazon, right? Amazon is a case study, right? This bookstore, right? You have all these brick and mortar bookstores that have done very well to their communities. And suddenly Amazon says, let's just sell it over the web. Let's create this e-commerce website, right? And that was the trend. And then, and they've added, different technologies to be able to not only sell to people, but, in a lot of ways, kind of understand your consumer and then train their thinking, right? To guide them towards you as a consumer, guide you towards their products. And then social media is added to that. And then the same concept of selling to a consumer, not only products, but ideas, right? To influence campaigning, to influence, elections and your viewpoint on certain things, so, and there's always been, I'm also an attorney, so you have that, I have this concept of something that's called, puffery, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but puffery is more or less kind of like a fine line between, selling your product and kind of exaggerating a bit to actually telling a lie, right? You can't lie about your product, else you can be charged with fraud, right? Fraudulent misrepresentation, and you can be prosecuted for it, even if if you're selling something. So there's that broad. But with the web, it's been, those guidelines aren't there, so when does puffery become fraud? When you're selling a product. So that's where things have really gotten out of hand, is where there's really no way to police what's being said. And the stakes are too high. I mean, you've seen what's happened recently at the Capitol. And then if you look at, recent years, you hear certain words being used like, radicalized. People are being radicalized. It used to be a term that was reserved for those that aren't from this country, right? Or those that are radicalized by people outside the country, right? But people are radicalized every day on the internet. They're radicalized on the internet, and very good people. I know people that again, when I asked them what, it used to be that I say, okay, what is 2 + 2? And they tell me 4, but now they insisted it's 6. I don't understand how they get to 6, but they die by it because they've been radicalized to believe it's 6 through this misinformation that's promoted there. So there's a need more than any time in history, because of the sheer power of and reach of the internet, to be able to change things for the better, so that it's not a consumer base to be sold, and it's not open season to whoever can come up with this algorithm or data to manipulate, but to actually effectuate truth, sharing, common solutions. So I'm really excited about what can be done, because something has to be done, because at the rate we're going, I think we're heading in very dangerous waters unless something is done.
I would agree. You brought up a couple of really good points, and the concept of like the Facebooks, the Amazons, the large stakeholders that in terms of technology, in terms of the internet and the web. I wonder, like, is there anything that's hopeful that's out there that's happening in the space that is valuable to us having a better future? Like, we hear a lot of the bad and where things are currently at, but are there any technologies? Are you all excited about blockchain and some of the other technologies that are coming into this market? Like, is this something that do you see that anything that's new that's happening in your space that you've noticed that could be of value? Feel free for anybody to speak on that.
Yeah. Me personally, I mean, I believe, with technology, there's lots of opportunities. I mean, I may have painted a, gloom and doom picture because I didn't talk about, of course, it's connected the world, and there's an opportunity to really bridge the opportunity gap, for being able to share information, right? Across, a global community. And different tools that enable that are certainly positive tools that can be used for positive change. But with any new technology, unpoliced comes the risk of, again, further manipulation. Because at the heart of it, and this is the reality of it, at the heart of it, it's consumer driven. It's all about how can we make money, and that's how it's viewed. And if there are not, checks and balances in place to kind of, I don't want to use the word necessarily police that, but at least check it, at least, fact check it, have an ability to have an open discussion on these things, then it will be used ultimately to see if it can make those who are in control more money.
Couldn't agree more. We have Fred Brown is finally in. He's was able to join us. Fred, I heard we got some technological issues that we had to take care of. But if you could, we have a great group of panelists up here, and we're happy you joined us. What would be if you could just give us an introduction of who you are, and then jump right in with, in terms of the internet, in terms of the web, the way that it currently is working. This is very transactional. How do you see that impacting your work, and what do you think could be done based off your perspective to help create a more equitable experience whenever we're using this type of technology?
Thank you, PJ. My name is Fred Brown. I'm president and CEO of the Forbes Funds. It's an intermediary foundation in the city of Pittsburgh. We work with about 2,500 nonprofits on an annual basis. We try to optimize our grant making by increasing its effectiveness and efficiency. The last 3 years, we've increased our grant making by 7-to-1 ratio. For every dollar invested in the sector, we've generated $7 of services rendered. Technology has become significant in the communications framework, given that in Allegheny County in southwestern PA, 60% of businesses are expected to permanently shutter as a result of COVID. In the 2,500 nonprofits we work with, half of them have budgets under $1 million, and yet they serve the most resilient people in our communities. And so what becomes the role of technology? Early on in COVID, we partnered with Nora Bates out of Sweden to generate a derivative of the Warm Data Labs and launched People Need People. We facilitated 21 two-hour community sessions to deal with physical distancing and social isolation as we saw our millennials impacted directly by COVID. And currently, since the impact of COVID, we facilitated 1,287 meetings with 15,170 participants on Zoom alone, now counting the other platforms we work with. In that framework, we believe that technology can be an equalizer for many mid-sized and small nonprofits in particular as they look at the role of AI and machine learning in the distribution of their efforts, resources, and body of work. And so we are intrigued by what could be a possible game-changing and level-setting process, and believe that the greatest concern we share probably with this group is data sovereignty. And so as vulnerable and resilient communities begin to be tapped overtly as a result of this need and overexposure to technology, how are their everyday activities being combed and used for profit, when in fact those institutions and people should be galvanized in a way that fulfills and addresses social issues through their lens. And so I would say that I'm interested in this conversation and how might we safeguard the integrity of resilient and vulnerable communities, but moreover, how do we use this moment in time to pivot to really recalibrate their ability to transition during COVID, which really much, for the most part, is aligned with their resiliency factors.
Very good. Wow, Freddie. Data is a big piece of what it is that you all are doing. I want to ask Nadia and Nicole, it seems like a lot of your work kind of runs parallel or, even overlaps a little bit with some of the work that Fred is trying to do with resilient communities. Do you have any comments on the work that he's doing, or how you see the web maybe working as a tool or a vehicle to bridge some of you all's work?
You want to start, Nicole, maybe?
I was still gathering my thoughts, so I was hoping.
Oh, not a problem.
Okay. Hello, Fred.
Hello.
So I can tell you a little bit about what has come out of community discussions we've been having at my end. So we have this online community, and its members are also anchored in their own communities in something like 80 countries. And the shared online space is where all of us share firsthand experiences from trying to do different things. And they tend to be quite difficult things, whether it's trying to start a new business or trying to fix the quality of tech education in your community, or failures in healthcare, anything. And so people share firsthand experiences, and the community is large enough and diverse enough that it's inevitable you will have someone with experience of trying to do something similar, or domain expertise from different parts of the world. And so we've had these conversations around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And it seems that the consensus is that it's kind of overrated. And if you're going to go down that path, it needs to be done in tandem with labor trade unions, with legal advisors, and with technical support from technologists who can better equip communities to make the right decisions upside. Because you're at a constant information asymmetry. There's a lot of pushing of, vendor pushing of different technological approaches to something which, might be best solved with tech just as a coordination, like lowering the cost of coordination and getting people in the same room, so to speak. So this would be my general feedback.
Fred, I'll give you a chance to respond to what she's saying. I already see a few things, but I'd like to know what your thoughts are. And then Nicole, if you do have anything, definitely would like to hear your thoughts as well, and then give Fred an opportunity to respond. And I think with what Nadia just said really quick, Andrew, I believe that just from a artificial intelligence and the type of technology that we have now versus a lot of the work that you're doing and how that could be used to optimize capacity in these different resilient communities would be great. Go ahead, Fred.
I definitely agree with Nadia that there needs to be a much more uniform, coordinated effort And if AI and machine learning is being implied as the next phase forward, coordination with unions makes sense. I think we need to be realistic about what's happening, what we would like, and what's needed. In the city of Pittsburgh, we have become a global icon around AI and technology, along with text, ads, and mads. And so we, for example, recruit 30,000 people a year to come to the city of Pittsburgh at a cost of $30,000 per person, plus relocation costs. Those people stay for 24 months or less. In the 90 communities in the city of Pittsburgh, 43 are comprised of people of color. Of those 43 communities, 80,600 people look like me in those communities. Of the 80,600, 46,000 are on probation and parole. So you have, at one end of the spectrum, you have corporations recruiting 30,000 people a year to come and work, not tapping into local talent. And so how does technology serve as a bridge to fortify talent bases that exist within broken systems that can help reform, reimagine, and restore those communities without being gouged and taken advantage of? That's what we're seeking to create. Secondly, I would think that the online community that you interface with over 80 countries from around the world, represent what I think is one of the microcosms and challenges in this work. My position, I'm the only Black person in my role in my region. I sit in a room where 99% of the people are white, and probably 90% are white men making decisions for an entire region. The same thing happens in my global meetings. When I look at this analysis and recognize that Europeans constitute 10% of the global demographics, but make up 98% of the decision-making, I feel like there's an untapped market for people of color. And I don't believe we need to keep asking people for permission to optimize our gift, skills, and talents. But we also need to recognize that as they begin to enter into the market shifts dramatically. Its trajectory is so high paced, so embedded in technology that even when you consider counterculture, that counterculture has to have a strong base to survive the trajectory of our current framework. And so I do agree with Nadia's analysis. My concern is, as we ponder the gap between these two dynamics, is ever widening with regards to how people of vulnerable communities can participate in the 21st century global economy. And if we can't guarantee that a deferment, a disclaimer, a counterculture is going to preserve the humanity of these folks, then we're putting at risk tomorrow's future. And I don't know, and I'm not sitting here saying we've got to 100% be this direction or that direction, because I definitely believe that we got to honor culture. I think culture has been lost in this fast-paced technology. However, what is the balance? What is the bridge? What is the framework that we need to cultivate that honors technology in a healthy way that doesn't take advantage of people and that people have control of their data?
Wow. Nicole, if you could definitely, add some, he's given us more context, and I want to say to Andrew, I hope you're thinking and spinning and thinking about this from an angle where you can talk about your technology, as well as Orne with what he's mentioning about cities like Pittsburgh and how they source workers in the technology and the digital space. That this is plays a lot into the work that you're doing and being able to create a pipeline for people of all works and all communities to be able to have access to that space. But go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, so I have 3 areas that I want to talk about just in response to some of your thoughts, Fred. So first of all, I think based on my work in platform abuse, so I study the ways in which technology has harmed, is harming, can be weaponized against marginalized communities. And I believe that we are barely scratching the surface of what we know about these disproportionately negative impacts on communities that are already vulnerable. And so an example of that, right, is, for example, smart home devices are being used against victims of domestic abuse, right? When we talk about the school to prison pipeline, right? We know that law enforcement is now looking at social media and saying, hey, you're Facebook friends with someone who's Facebook friends with someone who has gang affiliations. So we're going to put you on like a riskier list, right? And so there are all these things that are happening already that I think we need to actively partner with community-based organizations and partner with community advocates about to better understand what it even is that we're defending. What are the demands that we need to make of policymakers to not use technology in certain ways, and have more compelling arguments for how technology is harming us rather than just seeing it as this this vehicle for progress. So number two, I think there is a lot of space, and this is coming from having worked in nonprofit digital capacity building before. I know how resource constrained the space is. I think there's space to think about how, even if one nonprofit, one community-based organization doesn't really have the resources to make a lot of demands, how can we build collectives of nonprofits to make those larger demands to these platforms? And a good example of this is the Movement Cooperative is a cooperative of independent nonprofits that essentially they engage in forms of collective bargaining with tech vendors. So they might say, right, so like if one nonprofit isn't able to really negotiate down the price of a contract, 50 nonprofits who say, we all want to use this technology, but we can only use it if you lower the price or if you care more about privacy standards. That has like a much stronger, more compelling business case for these companies to actually listen. And then third of all, I think the point you mentioned that is really, really important is expanding access to digital spaces. So it's not just about how can we get the tech sector to serve us better, but how can we be a part of those conversations actively, right? Not just tech companies moving in and recruiting folks from outside of communities, but actually working to invest in communities. And again, I think there are some promising examples of this, but definitely needs to be more. One example that I think might be interesting to look at is there's an organization in New York, I think they're based in Queens, that helps tech companies transition their blue collar workers to engineering jobs. And so for companies like that have a lot of warehouse jobs, for example. So Amazon is a good example. They're not a client yet, but Amazon would be a good example of, can we have the tech company, so have Amazon invest in its warehouse workers to learn software development so that in a couple of years' time, they can graduate from being a warehouse worker to actually being an entry-level software developer within the same company. And so how can we kind of break down some of the barriers between lower paid workers within the tech ecosystem to those higher paid jobs with more opportunities for career advancement?
Nicole, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So you brought up a lot of really, really strong points. Allowing Orne had mentioned those larger companies, the Amazons, the Facebooks, if there's any level of accountability that can be had, it needs to start with them. You know, the community needs to have sovereignty. The community has to be in these discussions in order to have a value-based ecosystem, if there ever could be one. And I like the idea of a marketplace as well that's being created where, you know, if we all come together and say we'll use this software, then that's a different discussion. Andrew, just at a high level, I know that your work is about really understanding what the community truly wants. If the community is, I mean, there's a lot of high-level grand initiatives, the UN SDGs, you've got social determinants of health, there's a lot of money that's being thrown there, but how does that money actually reach the people that really actually need this money? And then how can we have benchmarked engagement where we can see that what we're doing actually works, because you need to be able to pivot sometimes. Not everybody wants the same thing. So
Right.
data at granular scale is something that's always talked about, but this is just too expensive. So they don't even try it. Instead we continue this transactional form of impact that doesn't really bring the type of impact that we're trying to have with the community, which should be holistic. It should be holistic impact, and it should be value-based.
Yeah.
So if you could just talk a little bit about your technology, because your technology is the technology of the future. And then Orne, if you could just, in fact, let's give Fred an opportunity to respond. And then Orne, if you could just touch on I think the work that you're doing as it pertains to the workforce of the future, which has to include everybody. And we need to all work together to solve this problem. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sure. Yeah. So many great points from all of the panelists, and Fred. Your mission is fantastic, and certainly being able to bridge that gap. There's a lot of different gaps. The biggest ones, and certainly we've been discussing them today. It's consumerism. It's treating people like numbers, and really the unbalanced nature of we take information from you in order for you to buy more products, but how does that really solve your problems, right? And being able to sort of identify specific things that impact specific people, and getting down to that granular level is so important. We call that hyper contextual. Context is such an important thing when you're dealing with any kind of technology. And I'll take a quick moment just to say, in general, I love technology, right? Technology is very exciting, seeing how quickly it moves, how innovations come so quickly. But I mean, really, in the end, technology is extremely powerful. But if it's not guided by good principles, good goal sets, good end results, it really can be very destructive, as we kind of pointed out. I mean, even just think of it, a car is a piece of technology. It gets you very fast and very quickly from point A to point B. But if there's nobody driving that car, you're just going to hit a tree, right? You need, sort of a much higher level organization and goal set to be able to direct this technology to really do what we need. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. If technology's focused and bent on, making us all consumers and enhancing our ability to buy things, as opposed to, actually solving real problems, then, there is that big gap. So, like I've said, being able to, first identify what that framework actually looks like, right? What are these data models that the artificial intelligence algorithms need to solve? I don't know that we know that. And I think that's kind of, the biggest challenge that we have is, how do we translate the needs of communities, the needs of individuals, and translate that into something that a machine can work with? Because if you think about it, go ahead.
Andrew, can I interject for a second and ask you a question? Would
Sure.
you say that the algorithms exist potentially, but they exist in the communities that are producing them? If you're resilient, it means that you're interacting with your environment in a certain way. It means that we don't have enough money to be able to do everything that we want, but being able to make the smart decisions on how to get people what they need, that's resiliency. That's
right.
Being proactive. There's an algorithm that would be created around it. But currently, the way that technology is used will extract the algorithm and say, hey, thanks for using our platform. And that value actually holds the keys maybe to solving real problems. And that data, that algorithm actually belongs to the community, which is where data sovereignty plays a role.
Yeah,
what are your
that's
thoughts
a
on
great
that?
point. You talk about data sovereignty, but you can extend that into, algorithm sovereignty, right? And algorithms, you're using that term generally, but algorithms is really, how people go about their daily lives. It's what they do. It's how they do things, how they see the world. Those are all translatable into algorithms. And as long as we can, create that, understand what it is, create that framework where we can translate those things into, workable solutions that are fair, balanced, and that, the people that are using these algorithms have a say, have a stake, right? So that they, not only do they benefit from the value that the algorithm gives, but also, they get some of that information back. I mean, that's the whole thing, with the Facebooks of the world. They're benefiting off your information. What's your benefit other than, sharing pictures? So yeah, I'll stop there.
So Fred, just really, really quick, like 30 seconds. What are your thoughts on what Andrew was saying and what Nicole said? And then it'd be great if Orne, if you could just jump in and, wrap us up on this particular topic as it pertains to just the job market and how we can keep some of the people that are actually building this stuff, you know, we can use that as something to empower communities as well. We can't expect the job market to be fair if we're only sourcing from one place. Go ahead,
Real
Fred.
quick, I would say that Nicole's points are very spot on. We push co-creation. Recently, we redesigned our work based upon human-centered design. We shifted from our work with the London School of Systems Change, where in 4 quarters, we increased our grant making by 400%. So we know how to be effective and efficient. What we realized in that pivot is that we left people behind. And so we withdrew from that framework to create a new human-centered design framework with a group called Headstorm to really look at how do we ensure the integrity through the focus of a triple bottom line by optimizing human beings. Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same energy that created the problem. However, how do we raise our frequencies to understand problem solving from a different level? Secondly, I would think that Andrew's responses around trans-contextual frameworks are very critical. We launched 2.5 weeks ago, an international anti-racism cohort called ARC for short. We had 158 companies, organizations, and community leaders from around the world based on recentering their work around a racial equity lens. The focus of that work was to really restore balance in our humanity by looking at the value and honoring difference and diversity. And I think to Nicole's earlier point, and I think to Nadia's earlier point, this is about trust. Change moves at the speed of trust. And so technology is not going to make that happen better, right? And so what we're doing is saying, here's technology, here's humanity, where's the bridge? One of the bridges is trust. The other one is, can I actually do something with you that changes my life? Or are you going to tell me what to do that doesn't change my life? So how do you create co-creative frameworks that really restore balance and honor people in a way that their way of preserving their lives is in line with utilization of your gifts, skills, and talents that takes that to the next level.
Very good. Yes. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you all are familiar, but if you look at the consumer price index over the last 20 years, at least in the United States, of course, the things that people need to survive, the food, water, shelter, the bottom 2 rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of need, they continue to increase in how much they cost. Like if those are increasing in cost, guess what decreased in cost in that same time period? Technology, toys, and cars. That means that if we're going to build a solution, if we're going to improve people's quality of life and solve those problems that are happening, those trends, those negative trends that are making it harder for people to live their lives and to be and to feel like they're living becoming the best version of themselves, we're going to have to use technology to do it. And currently, right now, we're using technology to cause and to exponentially make the problem worse. So I really appreciate what everybody is saying. Orne, if you could just jump in with some of the work that you're doing. You work with people from across the globe, actually, but just what is technology, or excuse me, Excellerent is a company that brings significant value because you're talking about a diverse pool of workers and builders. And, you know, if we're looking for jobs, companies like yours should be at the table for sure. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, I appreciate that. So just to give give some background, as I mentioned, I've been in the IT services industry for about 30 years or so. And a big part of what I've been doing is more or less leveraging the global workforce to deliver solutions to US-based customers. And that is more or less driven by the sheer lack of engineers in the U.S. to serve the U.S. Needs, right? So innovation is driven, and all the innovation and technology that we talk about, somebody has to build it, right? It's built by engineers, and the United States just does not produce not even a remote amount of engineers close enough to keep pace to drive innovation. So India has been the primary beneficiary of that gap globally, and their government had the foresight to really invest in technology way ahead of the curve. And then, right around, I guess, probably about 30 years ago or so, initially there was a huge shift in immigrants, right? Based on H-1B visas, and there's at least 60,000 engineers that are granted H-1B visas to come into the country to make up that workforce today. And then with, again, the maturity of tools like VPN and other collaboration tools, offshoring became best practice. And so my first visit to India was somewhere around 99, 2000. And, so I witnessed firsthand the transformation of India based on their ability to export IT services, right? Again, their number one resource is its people. It's a massive country, and they have, I think they're approaching China in terms of the volume of people that exist in India. In any event, so I witnessed firsthand how they were able to create a massive middle class by educating folks in software engineering and exporting those services to the West. 30 years ago, India was a sliver of wealth at the top and massive poverty across the entire country, essentially. Today, they have one of the largest, middle classes and upper middle classes that exist because of their ability to produce and contribute to technology and software engineering. So one of the things that I've done in more recent years is I've looked at the model in India and kind of posed the question, is that something that can be duplicated in other developing countries? And I've started a delivery center out of Ethiopia. And so it's the same model as what I'm trying to apply to Ethiopia. Is they have a very talented pool of resources. They have a curriculum in the universities, which is on par with India and the US in terms of what they're teaching software engineers, and a huge shortage still persists. So we started off with a small team of engineers, and we've done very good quality work for US customers. And we've grown over the last couple of years, where now we're approaching 200 engineers out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So our hope is that we grow to a scale where the world is on notice that Ethiopia is also a offshore destination. If you need engineers and you have a shortage of engineers, you could either leverage engineers from Excellerent and help us grow, or set up shop in Ethiopia like all the other companies have done in India, right? Amazon has 10,000 plus people in India, including anybody who can spell technology, has 1,000 people delivery center in India these days. So that is a model, because, Excellerent, our model is, because we're looking to expand this model across other developing countries. Our motto is that if you have the aptitude, if you have the work ethic, you should have the opportunity. And that's the problem. You have a lot of talented people globally whose talents are wasted because they don't have that bridge to opportunities. So we look forward to bridging that gap to opportunities. And as you expand on that, obviously you need engineers, and it's a specialized skill set. You have to work hard at it. You have to be well educated, and you have to be committed and dedicated in order to create that skill set. And but as technology is moving, and this is also, I think, something that ties into some of the points that I think, again, I'm sorry if somebody mentioned on this panel, I don't know everyone's name, I know Fred touched upon it as well, is how you could include, or how folks don't get left behind in this technology move, right? So there's lots of products that are being developed now that are based on, no-code technology, where you don't necessarily need to be a programmer or be an expert at math or be a software engineer to be able to create applications, create technology that adds value. And so it's more focused on understanding the business need, understanding the user experience, understanding the user interface, being creative, and then being able to kind of, use these tools that are being developed. And I think the no-code applications and tools that are being developed is a much easier transition, for folks that don't necessarily have computer science degrees, folks that may be working in a capacity where they understand the business, they understand the supply chain, they understand the workflow within their business, but they're not necessarily coders or engineers, where they would, the way things are moving, there's going to be a huge market for those types of resources that can add value. And I see that as a potential to bridge the gap where folks can kind of get in and be a beneficiary of the technology that's being developed, not only just from a user perspective, but again, it's a good paying career if you're able to contribute to this technology.
Wow. Yeah, this is, again, this is a really strong panel. I'm excited about everything that's being said. You're right, Orne, as it pertains to that no code approach really touched home, because there's a lot of people that don't get involved because they feel like they've already reached the end of the road. There's a term called learned helplessness, where like any living organism that feels like if it experiences repeated failure after failure after failure, it just stops trying. It'll stop trying, and that includes human beings. If people are not motivated, then that's where you see emotional wellness and mental well-being is now this buzzword. But this has always been the case. There have always been people that have been able to slip through the cracks, and not just around the world, just right here in the U.S. as well, where we are at. And this tied into Fred's work as well, which is why I'm glad you brought up some of the things that you were saying. There are areas in this country, whether it's in Detroit, whether it's in Pittsburgh, whether it's in where people's circumstances produce data that's driving this economy, and it's not being acknowledged. How can we bring that value back home to individuals that, because they're resilient and because they're working hard, because they, I just think there's a lot of really good opportunity there. And also with what you were saying, Nicole, with respect to platform exploit, just understanding how technology can be used against me equips me to be like I'm a smart consumer now. I'm a smart producer now. I'm not just an end user. I'm a smart end user, and that knowledge is king and or extremely important. We'll just say that. And the information ecology needs to be built, and that's the power of this overweb. And I really hope that the people that are on this panel understand the synergies that exist between them, so that we can, because these conversations need to be had. Nadia, you were saying a lot in the chat. Did you have any comments or thoughts on, I know you went first, you had opportunity to round everything out. Do you have any thoughts on how you see things happening on this great panel?
I think where we're going is looking at what appropriate support systems are for this very specific context. So we talk about the innovation support system. You talk about, when we say this, it's incubators, accelerators, all of that stuff. In a setting where you're trying to get people, above a certain threshold to where they can even participate in that, what are the components of an appropriate support system? Because here it needs to be patient in a way that VC definitely is not. It needs to be supporting people developing skills in multiple directions. It can be from super basic things like just planning your time, to language, to social skills, interacting with people in a very specific setting. So when you have, what is this environment that's going to be supportive of behavioral change and like tangible skill development change? There are really good examples where this has been done in different communities. It does not look, it's not tech solutionist, and it doesn't start from the tech as a basis. Tech comes in later as an enabler, but that's not where you start. You start there, I think you're just, it's very much going to be vendor driven. And then once you're in that sinkhole.
I really appreciate, is it okay for me to say something?
No, go ahead, brother, please.
I just want to raise up that we live in, COVID has exponentially indicated the dichotomy, the challenges that exist with resilient communities and people of color. As we begin to fortify our humanity, society and technology continues to move forward. I really respect and honor everything I've heard today, and I embrace it. But I'm stuck with, I was on the conference call before this on an international panel with post-industrial cities focusing on the UN SDGs. Part of the reason I started an African American affinity group in Mexico 2 years ago was I was in Mexico at a world conference, and there was all of these subgroups of meetings and nobody for African Americans in the whole world. So I went around every meeting. They did not let me in. So I went to the leadership and said, hey, I can't get none of these groups. You know, why wasn't there an African American one? And they were like, nobody asked. So I said, you got all these groups, they barred us from getting in. It's their group. We, you know, that's the protocol. So we created one. We are the answers we seek in the universe, but we have to be galvanized around a single point of contact about what does humanity mean. I don't want to sit here and say it's this or that as a result of this conversation, but it's a this and that proposition. We have to keep pace with technology in such a way that it safeguards humanity, while we also build the foundation for humanity and people of color to see their role in technology. And we have to do that concurrently, in my opinion. And I think that we have to really deal with the dynamic tension of that. And what does it mean when, in fact, you know, when you look at, you know, what role does the Marshall Plan play in this part of the country, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky? How do we look at the 10-point plan from the Prime Minister in the UK and their impacts on reducing their impact and use of fossil fuels and using offshore urban wind turbines, and their trajectory for 2030 to do away with fuel vehicles or gas vehicles by 2030 and go all electric. Like, each one of these pivots on one level is about preserving our world while we're making these shifts. How are people participating in those shifts to be informed about how technology in that instance is being used to preserve humanity on a global level? So I just want to like put a pin in that and say that I really honor and respect what I'm hearing, and I'm all about people 100%. But I'm also in many spaces where people are moving ahead, and I'm seeing the gap getting wider and wider and wider. What is the need to bridge that gap? Unless you're telling me there's no need to bridge the gap, we got another subculture we're gonna work on to make it happen. And if that's the case, cool. But if that's not the case, what is the pockets of growth? And I think Orne really highlighted one, which is, can we identify pockets and niches that really we could groom talent so that they have a specific skill set that allows them to emerge into the 21st century global economy as a thoughtful participant?
Wow. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we need to have the solutions baked in to whatever it is that we're going to be doing. We can't just talk about the problems. It's interesting. So something that you brought up, and you brought up what Orne said, and I think this is a good transition into Nicole, where we talk about the no-code approach and finding places where people can bring value, because that's what a community does. A community is a group of people that bring value to one another, and that value can be exchanged easily, or at least it should be able to. But it's very difficult if, like David had mentioned in the beginning, that we're in a two-dimensional space. We're in a two-dimensional space, and we have all this, hi Katie, we have this dimensionality of what it is to be human, and all these different thoughts and all these different actions and behaviors, but it's being compressed in this two-dimensional space in which you're being treated like a consumer. So when I think about the opportunity and understanding, like, hey, the data is saying that there's value that could be found over here if we had some people that can get trained really, really quickly and start teaching that. How can we create a world where community can work together in that way? I think a lot of your work, Nicole, or at least some of the things that you mentioned that you're doing, I think play into the no-code approach, where people can bring value. And you don't have to be a coder. You don't have to be maybe a software engineer. You could still bring significant value. Do you have any thoughts on that, Nicole?
One second, and Nicole, you can be brief, and then we're gonna have to transition after her comment because we're already 10 minutes into the next one. So go ahead, Nicole, close us off.
Yep.
Wow, so much pressure. Yeah. I mean, I would say that I do think there needs to be more opportunities for folks to engage in tech who are not technical, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean just with like no code solutions. It's also about creating the right processes and decision-making infrastructure to allow people from civil society, to allow people in policy and government to be able to substantively engage in these conversations as well. So I think creating these sort of multidisciplinary spaces is what we need more of.